Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Fawcett Society's coronavirus conversations. We've been having a series of these chats online, looking at a number of sort of big issues. And today I'm very pleased to be chairing this event, a huge issue looking at the intersection of the COVID crisis with the BAME community, particularly the impact upon women and, of course, the Black Lives Matter protests following the murder of George Floyd and where we are now. So I'm just going to give people a couple of minutes to get on the system, or how that makes me sound really old-fashioned. get on the thing. I know, and you can basically send us messages or questions on the chat function, and we've got people who are going to be monitoring that. There's a lot of people on the call. There is going to be people. Oh, hello, Catherine there, saying hello from Brussels. Say where you're tuning in from, because it's nice for all of us to know where you're from. There's I think there's like 600 people who have registered for this, so we'll just take a while to get everybody. Hello, Orla from Belfast. Hello, Mo from Brighton. Chris from Surrey. Laura from Bristol. Lynn from Funny Women, Rochester. Hello, Lynn. Great, we've got loads of people coming in. Northern Ireland, Brighton, lots of bees. Nottingham, Natalie from Nottingham. So just some house rules. You can post comments and questions, and we'll pick up some of your questions from the chat room. Obviously, we want this to be a kind of a safe space for discussion. A lot of people are feeling, you know, it's been a pretty traumatic couple of weeks, let's be honest. So if anybody posts anything abusive or insensitive or hurtful or racist, you will get kicked out. This has been sort of moderated. If you do want to really lash out at somebody, you can have a go at me afterwards on Twitter. That's why I exist on Twitter, for your rage, basically. And the other thing that I'm really pleased to say is that tonight we're raising money for Southall Black Sisters, and we've so far raised £750. So if you do want to chip in a bit through the thing, please do. Paula Green has just said that she is a good friend of yours and you've done incredible work, so lots of love already. And also, we'd love to see your tweets during and after the event. The hashtag is Corona Conversations. So that's Corona Conversations, 2 big C's there. So we'll just settle everybody in, give you all a few more minutes. And we've already got 170 people. Abba from Manchester, hello. Inya from Elephant and Castle. Annette from London, hello. Hello, Lorraine from Birmingham. Tara in Canonbury. Got people from all over the place. South London and North London. We're very, very inclusive at the Fawcett Society. Sarah from Chester. Alex from Plymouth, hello. Katie from Nottingham, Hannah from Edinburgh, hello Edinburgh, Angela from Equality in Tourism, that's very important, Tony from Kensal Rise, Jess from Walthamstow, Karen from the Manchester Feminist Network, great to have you here, Karen, Samira from London, Catherine from Bermondsey, Hannah from Kent, so we've got lots of people. Right, okay, I'm just... just finding out if we should get properly sort of started. The other thing which is just useful to see is that, as well as looking at research on the effects of COVID on BAME women, Fawcett are also working on a really important project with the Runnymede Trust, which is one of the kind of leading sort of think tanks on race issues. And that's a project exploring pay and the progression of women of colour, which is a really, really important issue. We may actually talk a bit about that in terms of some of the substance going forward. And there'll be a link posted in the chat as well. So that's another thing for you guys just to keep an eye on as well. Right, I think what we'll do is we'll get started. Hello, Pamela from Vauxhall. So I'm really, really delighted to have a fantastic panel today of really respected and acclaimed campaigners in their field, people who are really at the front line of a lot of the big issues around Black Lives Matter, and actually, you know, really at the vanguard of trying to make change. And they will give you their honest experiences tonight. We want to have an open conversation, but they're also going to give you some practical advice, being experts in their field and people who have worked very hard at this. As we all know, equality does not come easily. It takes a long time. It takes a lot of resilience. And I think these guys will give you some tips. As I said at the beginning, it does feel like it has been an incredibly traumatic 2 weeks for anybody who cares about racial inequality. Not only are we all exhausted about the fact that this story seems to be on repeat and repeat and repeat, but it has also just been so shocking to see, let's call it what it was, the live lynching of a man, which we saw happen in real time, and then the fallout. And I think the big question that I've been pondering, and I'm sure all of you have been pondering, is how do we make sure this is not just another blip where we all get very fired up, we have hot tears and hot takes, but nothing changes. We all go back to having amnesia about these issues. How do we make this into a teachable moment that we all actually learn from and we can participate in and we can make change? And how do we do that at a time when the political structures are not exactly lending themselves well to big change? You know, whatever you think about the government, we have this government for the next 4.5 years. How do we organize? How do we mobilize? How do we try and match our rage and our anger and our fury with actually getting things done? And I'm really keen to hear from all of you out there about your suggestions as well as your questions. What are some of the suggestions that you have? What are some of the things that you want to see happen? So we have David Weaver. David is the Deputy Chair of Operation Black Vote, and he's the Independent Chair of CORE, which is the Coalition of Race Equality Organisations. And David has got a really important job. Operation Black Vote has been absolutely essential in this country at moving the conversation on diversity, and they have been hugely successful. There are a few organisations that can actually say we have delivered change. They have. We have got one of the most ethnically diverse parliaments, and that is largely down to them and the work they do in a very cross-party way as well. They work with all the parties, and perhaps one of the testaments of their success, and I know there'll be a lot of people that have got a lot of issues with the Conservative Party, but the Conservative Party have elected a lot of Black and Asian people. Actually, I think the Conservative Party have more Black men in their party than the Labour Party does, and the Operation Black Vote's been a big part of that. So Lord Simon Woolley now, who was part of Operation Black Vote, worked very closely with Theresa May. So it's great to have David on the call. We also have Dr. Shola Mos-Shogbamimu, who is an absolute superstar. You will have seen Shola ruling the airwaves. I mean, she has been queen of the airwaves. She's a lawyer, she's a political activist, she's a campaigner for women's rights, and she is the only person that knows how to school Piers Morgan. And she is absolutely brilliant. If you don't follow her on Twitter, please do. I mean, she really battles this day in, day out, and is brilliant. We're going to hear from her about her experiences in the media. I'm delighted to have Patrick Vernon. Patrick already got a name check at the beginning of this. Patrick is actually born, ironically, in the constituency where Enoch Powell was an MP, and perhaps as a reaction to that, he has dedicated his life to campaigning for racial equality, and he has done so much work. He's got over 20 years on the front line, particularly working on key issues: local government, public health, heritage, race equality, local government, the voluntary sector. You know, there's a lot of people who you see kind of swishing around and doing the sort of really, really high level stuff. Patrick does a lot of work where it actually matters. And he's been doing a lot of work in terms of health outcomes and looking at the COVID impact on the BAME community, both as patients, but also as kind of care workers. So we're delighted to have Patrick. And last, but by no means least, is the brilliant Camille St-Omer Donaldson, who is a leading campaigner and fundraiser. And Camille has made a name for herself as an ardent activist as part of the movement known as Charity So White. We all know that the charity sector has had a lot of controversy about how it has conducted itself, about how it's, you know, managed its own power, its own abuse of power, the fact that there is a kind of hangover from colonialization and sort of white savior and all this kind of thing. And Camille is at the vanguard of being a sort of young, thrusting activist who's really trying to change and shake up the charity sector. So she's going to be telling us, and I think, you know, she's done a lot of stuff in terms of the British Red Cross, and so she's going to really give us, I think, quite an honest account of what's happening with the charity sector. There was quite a lot of focus on the charity sector. It kind of dropped off, and I think it's really important we keep our eye on that ball. So we're going to start off with all our panelists just giving you a quick overview of, you know, what their different disciplines are and where they are with things right now. And then I'll have a quick chat, and then we'll start bringing in your questions. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn to the brilliant Shola to start us off.
Hello, everybody. Let me start off by saying that 2020 has done more for the hard conversations on race inequality than any other year that I'm aware of in the last decade. We started off the year with a huge assault on whether or not there is racism against Meghan Markle. It became a global discussion. It probably caused a lot of relationships to go their separate ways. And but it forced people, especially when you look at the media, there was a lot of the way the coverage was being put out on the issue of racism. It was clear that society-wise, people didn't understand the concept of white privilege or what racism really looks like, or overt or covert racism. And then you just fast forward by a month or so, we're assaulted by more, even devastating news, seeing that there are more Black and Asian ethnic minority groups, people from the Black, Asian ethnic minority communities dying from COVID than their white counterparts. And we understand that that's because of the structural intersecting inequalities rooted in institutional racism that exacerbated the exposure to COVID-19. Again, it brought up the issue of race inequality. But a lot of people didn't want to hear it. They wanted to blame other things like, oh, it must be culture, or it must be something biological about Black people or Asian people, all of that stuff. And then you have George Floyd. Now, George Floyd's death zoomed in what racism is like in such a way that even the deniers, the doubting Thomases, could not deny that there was something really wrong with this picture, with what they were saying, and the utter disregard and contempt for a Black man's life. You still have those who are denying it, but the reality is that it really forced the hard conversations on what racism is. And you do have those in this country, in the United Kingdom, who say, well, actually, that happened in the United States. It's not happening here in the UK. So you can see the kind of hard conversations that have had to be had. Now, for a number of us, Ayesha, myself, and many others that have these conversations in the media, the reality is that those platforms are not safe spaces to have this conversation. You have to get on there, be ready to not only defend the truth as you know it, you have to also be ready to defend who you are, because your experiences are who you are. And people are there ready to ask you, well, provide evidence. I'm sorry, you don't ask for evidence of anti-Semitism or, you know, transphobia or homophobia. So why is it that the oppression of Black people has to continually be justified by evidence? Now, I think that just before George Floyd, you had the Amy Cooper situation. And that was a perfect example of how if they did not see that video, people would not know what that kind of racism looks like. And that's the honest truth. And I remember explaining on one of the interviews that I did that I did not need to see that video. If Ayesha had come to me or Patrick had come to me and said, this happened to me, I would know exactly what they were talking about, because we've experienced it, or we know people who've experienced it. But for many folks, especially our white siblings, who don't experience this, who don't understand what it looks like or what form it can take, this was a shock that somebody could weaponize the color of their skin, like Amy Cooper did, to put an African American man down. But the other conversation for us here in the United Kingdom is that, look, this happens here. I know the police officers in the US have guns. That does not make it much worse than it is here. This happens here. The overt, the covert racism, the different ways that whiteness is weaponized. So these are the hard things, I think, that 2020, aside from the fact that I'm sure a lot of people want to quickly go back to 2019 and think they're coming to 2020. 2020 has brought this huge focus on race in relations like nothing else has I would say in the past decade.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much for that, Shola. Shola and I often take it in terms tag team on Good Morning Britain and get baited by Piers Morgan on Meghan Markle. And you're so right. One of the questions that he kept saying was, "Where's the evidence? Where's the evidence? Where's the evidence?"
You are the evidence, Piers. You are the evidence.
Although he's funny now, he's kind of slightly, he's had a slight.
Yes. I think that the last interview I had with him, when we were talking about Amy Cooper, he said the penny dropped, and he understood that there are types of or formats of racism that he would not see because he's white, and it's not something he would experience.
Well, it's one of the things I think is amazing is that the smartphone has done more to actually protect Black lives than a lot of the institutions. And because, as you say, the evidence is there and it's incontrovertible, nobody, because if you're right, if someone had just posted their testimony on Twitter, people would have been like, a photo or it didn't happen. Where's the evidence? So you're absolutely right. Okay, thanks for that, Shola. We're now going to go to David Weaver from Operation Black Vote. David.
Okay, thank you very much, and it's really good to be here. And I'm going to say something which I'll probably say all night, which is I agree with Shola. I agree with everything she said there. You know, it's a historic moment, and you've got that double whammy of COVID-19 and the George Floyd murder. You've got that disproportionality that we all know about. It just seems like we have to keep on restating that which we already know, the disproportionalities. I know that as a Black man, my proximity to death, to anxiety, to depression, loneliness, people feeling they have no dignity in our communities is far greater than my white colleagues and my friends. It impacts all of us, but we all know what that is the situation. But yet we still have to keep on trying to prove this disproportionality, trying to demonstrate to government that what they should be doing with us, like they would do in any other area of social policy, is to target where it hurts. And that's why Operation Black Vote are asking for a race equality strategy. There's got to be some race specificity in terms of what the government do. And calling this commission is not good enough. As far as we see, it's another attempt to kick the whole thing into the long grass. We've had the Lammy review, we've had the Windrush not implemented, aspects of the Grenfell not implemented, McGregor Smith not implemented. So there is no evidence at all that having this new commission, number 10, is going to do anything different. And the credibility of any review has to be informed by who's leading the review. And we know with Munira Mirza, she is the person who said very explicitly time and time again that she doesn't agree with structural racism. She doesn't agree with institutional racism. How can any review have any credibility when it's been led with someone with those views? The credibility is also informed by the kind of people that are going to be on the panel. Munira Mirza surrounds herself with people who equally claim that institutional racism does not exist, but worse than that, will accuse people like us as playing the race card, that we're playing the victim. And that is what has been happening. We're playing the race card and we're playing the victim. So I really believe that if we're going to take this forward, it can't be a reliance on government. It can't be reliance on government. We have to go back within our communities and to get the support of our communities, which is there. You know, there are people in our communities that are looking for leadership. And when they look at what government is doing, and I have to say, you know, I'm not convinced through anything I'm hearing from the opposition parties, that they're going to be doing any different. And that's a sad thing about this, because when we talk about these disproportionalities, we're talking about people. We're talking about people that are dying. Just this morning, I heard that there was a young nurse, I think aged 28 years of age, who was forced to work on a COVID-19 ward without any PPE equipment and died. And that's just another statistic. And people aren't recognizing that we're dealing with lives. So that's my kickoff point, really. I think we need a race equality strategy. I think government needs to stop kicking this whole thing into the long grass. But I think the answer really lies in our communities. Operation Black Vote over the years have worked around that democratic deficit around getting Black people more involved in the system. And that's what we're doing, because we feel that the power of the vote or the threat of the vote is the kind of thing that's going to make government listen.
And just picking up on that, in fact, Bola Gibson has just raised a question, which I'm just going to just pick up on right now, because I think it's germane to what you've just said, David. There has been a lot of debate around the term BAME now, and the fact that there is, you know, differences of identity and equality of opportunity and outcomes within that BAME group. And I say this as an Asian woman, an Indian woman, Muslim woman. You know, I definitely have had a lot of racism. I still do get a lot of racism, but I recognize my privilege over the disadvantages that the Black community faces. Do you think it's now time to sort of get rid of that term? And do you think that some of these things, in terms of you've got a lot of prominent South Asians in government leading these reviews, do you have to have a Black person leading a review about Black Lives Matter, or do you think we need to sort of, you know, change the sort of group that we're all lumped into?
I never liked the term BAME, then it was BAME, and sometimes I think that's just an attempt to dilute the specificity of what we're speaking about. In no other area of government policy, if issues are affecting different communities differently, would they lump them into one category? It's an absolute insult. And the manifestations and implications of COVID-19 are affecting different minority communities in different ways. You have to just drill down the figures and get that. So I think we have to say what we mean and mean what we say. There are particular problems with particular issues with particular communities, and that's what we have to target. Should it be a Black person? We need to have Black people at the top of organizations, but that has symbolic value. It has symbolic value. It's what they do with it. I would rather have someone who's going to do the business than someone, frankly, like some of the people that have been popping up in government, saying I'm a BME person and racism doesn't impact on me. So, but it should not be an excuse not to put Black people in senior positions, because quite frankly, when you look at the statistics in public services, in health, in local government, I do a lot of work in local government, it's dismal, it's unacceptable. And in this society, there should be no reason, no excuse why we don't address this particular issue. Getting Black people in leadership, good Black people in leadership, and stop this BAME nonsense and deal with the specificity of the problem that we're finding.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And certainly in a lot of the circles I move in, whether it's politics, whether it's the media, there are no Black faces in senior positions at all. I think somebody actually just messaged a while ago on the chat that in Plymouth, which I think is a Labour-run council, again, there's very, very few people of colour, very few sort of Black people. So I think that's a really important point. I'm sure we'll come back to that. Now going to go to Camille. And Camille, you're going to give us a bit of an overview about what's happening with the charity sector right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I just wanted to go back to that point about BAME and just how it kind of perpetuates that kind of idea of othering still. If we are kind of lumped together as ethnic minorities, we become the other. And that's another part of it, I think, that really kind of needs to be unpicked and to really highlight those nuances. So absolutely, as I think we're going to say for the rest of the talk today, I agree with David, and I agree with what Shola mentioned as well. I think something that I'm really keen to focus on is also my personal experience. I'm a Black woman, of course, and I'm angry. I'm tired. My heart is heavy. But one of the things that we really kind of want to make sure that we're recognizing, especially as part of Charity So White, that now is not the time. Now is the time to organize. Now is the time to strategize. Now is the time to mobilize and really focus our efforts. And that's really kind of as an overview what we're calling on people of color, but predominantly you know, kind of white senior leaders to take that action within the charity sector. So I guess as an organizer, that's what we do. We organize groups of people, and we ourselves are an organized group of volunteers and sort of grassroots activists who are calling for the charity sector to really take the lead on rooting out racism. And that often, oh, well, absolutely, I think, means that there needs to be an acknowledgement that it exists within our sector. Yes, I know that many of us are in the sector to do good and to fight injustice, but that is not a barrier or an excuse as to why what's happening kind of internally cannot be bad and cannot kind of be complicit and perpetuating that kind of structural inequality and racism. I think we're all people of colour as part of Charity So White, predominantly women, and we work within the sector that we love. And I think that's something that I always like to highlight, because we're never trying to take the sector down, and we don't want to burn it to the ground. We want to make it better. And every day we put our lives sort of on the line to really fight for that change. And I think one of the things that's got to us is really struggling to understand why so many people in the sector have been so quick to list the barriers to tackling racism, and actually not to start finding those solutions to addressing the urgency and the problem that's needed. So that clear action that we need to see. So a little bit, I guess, about Charity So White. So yeah, we started the campaign last year, and it was predominantly started on Twitter after one of our organisers witnessed some racist training from a charity organisation. And it really exploded. You know, we had so many people on Twitter kind of using the hashtag Charity So White, sharing their very personal, very real lived experience of the racism that they had experienced. And I think it was validating for people of colour, whilst it was shocking, I imagine, for many of our white colleagues who saw some of these accounts. And I think what's really thrown us into the centre of everything at the moment is we released a live position paper on the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on BAME communities. Now, we did this in April, right? We did this before the statistics and you know, the commission and the government kind of calling for the new review. So we already could see, again, back to Shola's point about living it, we already could see kind of how COVID-19 was set to exacerbate already existing inequalities, but still were not listened to at that point. Another thing that we really wanted to focus on, and we think is incredibly important, is that we then released an open letter. And what we were calling for in that open letter is ring-fenced funding. For OBE initiative kind of highlighted that there were set to be 9 in 10 BAME-led organisations, grassroots organisations, that were set to close within the next 3 months, bearing in mind this was 2 months ago, if they didn't receive the necessary emergency funding and it wasn't ring-fenced and distributed in an equitable way to make sure that they were still able to help people on the ground. And where you look at that kind of systemic racism and kind of looking at the fact that for many, many years they'd been underfunded, you could see how that would happen. In the recovery kind of stages that I guess we're going to go through over the next couple of months, even years, BAME-led organisations are going to be at the key of that, at the heart of that, in helping our communities to recover, not only in the sense that I guess we're grieving and supporting us as a people, as a community to organise, but also to continue to provide those vital services that they have been doing thus far. So I think our paper really highlighted kind of 5 key issues which we're now seeing some conversation around, about the kind of health inequalities, the emergency measures and legislations that were going to impact BAME communities, the risk of destitution, the hostile environment and the impact that that has on our communities, and how protection and enforcement is also going to play its role. So kind of really using the whole context, I think, of looking at the situation is what's going to really help us to get to the root of that. So, I mean, for us, we could definitely see that the impact that it was going to have, and we've been proven with kind of the review that's come out recently and what's been commissioned. And I think we've really been trying to ensure that there is a focus here in the UK on acknowledging that we too have a problem, and it's not just kind of singled out for the US, but without acknowledging our prejudices and naming racism, our work in the sector is ultimately going to be ineffective. So for us, it's a crisis on top of a crisis with COVID-19 and the impact, but also kind of as a result of what we're seeing with Black Lives Matter. And I think it's important to recognise, even with this being Refugee Week, the impact that also kind of that crisis on top of a crisis will be having on many migrant women at the moment who have insecure immigration status, for example, who are escaping violence, and you know, the list goes on. So I think the charity sector really has the ability to shift the needle. We're in the best place on oppression and racism across the sector. And I think we really are best placed to be able to do that if we start to take that action now and really take a deep look into ourselves and start to unpick some of the kind of ideologies that we've held on to for many years. So that's kind of, yeah, my position.
Thanks, Camille. And you've been getting a lot of praise. Roman says Camille is absolutely spot on. Follow her on Twitter immediately. And also it's actually worth following at Charity So White as well, because it's a really fascinating insight into what is going on. And just one other topical kind of news thing I wanted to pick up in terms of charity. This is more overseas development. What did you think about the kind of depressing announcement that we were scrapping the Department for International Development, and what do you think the knock-on effect will be in the charity sector?
I think firstly, it really shows us the strategy. I'm not an expert kind of within the kind of political sphere, but the strategy that the government is adopting at the moment. More and more, everything that they're kind of speaking about is causing extreme trauma for us. And this seems to be another triggering factor to hear that kind of, as we know, charities are struggling at the moment, we're now going to stop giving that aid overseas. So I think firstly, it was, disappointing to hear that. In terms of but just to kind of also focus on the fact, yes, disappointing, but also shouldn't let us kind of be derailed. They're kind of throwing lots of different things out at the moment, lots of different changes.
I think it's called lots of dead cats.
There we go, lots of dead cats. Although I don't believe that this maybe is exactly that, but it shouldn't derail us from really focusing on the fact that the charity sector, again, is just going to be more needed than ever before. The impact is going to be heavier, and unfortunately, that impact is going to be felt on those BAME-led organisations, the ones who are on the ground, the ones who are trying to support our communities, both in the diaspora and also here in the UK. So I think it just goes on to our long list that we've all already been speaking about thus far, of all of the things that are going to impact us not being able to be there for BAME communities who need us most, not only now, but in the recovery.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you so much. And thanks so much for all your comments that are still coming in. Very useful. Quite a few comments. I think Mo actually sent in brilliant hashtag BAME over. I think that's what we've decided as of tonight. I think we've decided that maybe that term is, we do have to kind of move on from that. But actually Jane does make an important point. So one of the things that I think is quite important, I think we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think it's really important to have solidarity between the Asian community and the BACP community. Let's not pretend Islamophobia is a very, very big issue as well. And I think we don't want to pit communities against each other. I think we want to stand in solidarity and in empathy and in friendship and in kinship together, because I think we achieve more. And Jane has actually made a really important point that there is also a lot of disparities, in the Asian community as well. Sort of if you look at the outcomes and pay and income for Bangladeshi women, for example, who are pretty disadvantaged compared to, let's say, sort of Indian women. So I think it's really important that I think that the BAME thing has been used in a nefarious way, but we don't want to remove the kind of shared solidarity between kind of community, which I think is really important. Now, Patrick, we're going to come to you now, and you're going to give us a bit of an overview about the work you've been doing, but particularly on what's happening on the front line in terms of COVID and BAME as well.
Sure. Hi everyone, it's really fantastic. There's a real good number of people listening and debating. That's what we need to have, actually. I'm going to give you a history lesson, if I may. 1965, there was a meeting that took place in central London in Bloomsbury, involving Martin Luther King, who was going to Oslo to pick up his Nobel Peace Prize for his work around the civil rights movement in America. He met with a number of Black, Asian and white activists who wanted to change the law and to tackle what was then known as the colour bar. One of the people that was in that meeting, who sadly passed away about a few weeks ago, was Dame Jocelyn Barrow, 91 years old. And they got so inspired by the speech of Martin Luther King that they formed an organisation called the Campaign Against Racial Discrimination. And that that group, they only lasted for a few years, and they were able to influence and shape and lobby for the first piece of legislation around race equality, the 1965 Race Relations Act. And then some of them got involved around influence the 1968 Race Relations Act. Now we're in 2020. The question we need to ask ourselves, all the laws, changes, policy of all the political parties, things have gone backwards and forwards to where you have a situation now where you have a government which starts talking on one level. I can remember Matt Hancock talking only about a week ago, Black Lives Matter, but yet they suppressed the report around the impact of the coronavirus on BME communities. Black Lives Matter, but we want to protect all our statues of great white men. Black Lives Matter, but there's hardly any black people working at senior level in the civil service, in the police, local government, or the NHS. And so this is the challenge that we face. And I think the George Floyd experience combined with the impact of COVID-19, people have seen it as two viruses. The viruses of racism and the virus of the pandemic all coming together. And that actually has forced the country to seriously look at itself. And in many ways, we have this moment in British history. Every 10, 20 years, there's like this window of opportunity where can we make a change? Can we make a difference? I think the last major epoch moment that we had was around the death of Stephen Lawrence, the murder of Stephen Lawrence in 1993, where everyone got involved. Even the Daily Mail got involved. Everyone got involved that this is not right. And then then we've passed legislation, and then we've gone backwards again. So the question for all of us, I think, on this call is what can we do to make sure that the dial doesn't go backwards? Yes, the word BAME does not help, and so we need to think of what's the alternative of BAME. People used the word politically black, which was quite effective in the 60s and 70s, where there was that solidarity between people of African heritage and Southeast Asian communities. We recognized that the color bar was discriminating against all of us. But by the time we reached the 2000s, it was all about me, my community, all about myself. And in many ways, that's what we've got. If you look at the current government, they're from that generation saying me. I'm talking about my individual racism that I've experienced, but I'm not going to talk about structural racism. That's got nothing to do with the problems of Britain today. And that is part of the context. So in terms of the coronavirus and its impact, and it's had an impact on, I'm sure all of you will have stories to share about someone that you've known that's you've lost a loved one, or a co-worker, or you've heard someone that's had the coronavirus or may have died. I mean, I've lost my brother-in-law, my sister's partner died of COVID-19 about 2 months ago. And so no, that's fine. So it's had an impact on lots of families on different levels, and in many ways. And that's why I've been working with Ubele, DMB, a number of BME health professionals. Sorry, I used the word BAME. Don't slap me, please. Please. Look at Shola. For a public inquiry. And I recognise the work of OBV, and I support what OBV is doing, the work that David and Simon and the team are doing around a race equality strategy. But what's quite clear, and to me, it's confirmed this in the last few days, a race equality strategy is only as good as the intent, the commitment to race equality. And the question we need to ask ourselves, if they were using that test, an intent and a commitment and a spirit to make a difference, does that apply to the current government? Debate. Question, I don't think so. And what has happened, if you look at the history of our own civil rights movement in Britain, it might not be as sexy and glamorous as the US story, but our story is actually a quite important story for us in terms of us being British. And how we've been successful in our own civil rights movement has been changes in the law, along with direct action, a whole range of things. And that's why I think what happened over the last 10 days around Black Lives Matter is really important. For the first time, it's brought, not the first time, there has been a unity of black and white coming together. For those of you who can remember Rock Against Racism, check the history books. when Eric Clapton did a Nazi salute at a concert in the mid-70s, that was the birth of Rock Against Racism. Black and white musicians came together and say, we want to kick out this racism in the music industry. And then later on, you had to kick out racism in football, the red card. So we have these moments where we do come together on particular issues, but we'll never ever come together on a systemic issue of structural racism and white privilege and white power. And I think what's happened over the last 10 days, there's been this, and time will tell whether it's going to be seismic change in society attitudes. But it's now led the conversation that we're not talking about the narrative of Britain. It's not just simply about getting rid of Colston statue, which I think was a good thing. I see that as almost symbolically as the Berlin Wall coming down. That's what happened in Germany in 1989. That's our kind of Berlin Wall moment, what happened in Bristol. And it's led to this big, massive debate about this country, about the narrative of Britain. And we have a window of opportunity to make a change, not just simply about improving better health outcomes and the impact of coronavirus, or having more black and brown faces in senior management in public sector and other. It's a deeper question about the psyche of this country, a conversation that we've never had. At least in America, they talk about it. They may agree to disagree, but they talk about it. And now in Britain, we have an opportunity to have a proper conversation, the legacy of enslavement, the legacy of empire, the legacy of colonization, the legacy of everyday racism, discrimination. This is an opportunity for that change. And I think the question for all of us on this call is, what are we going to do about it? Are you going to be part of the problem or part of the solution? That is a fundamental question that all of us need to answer. And I think it's really, really critical. So the work I'm doing is, we need to have a public inquiry, because we need to use the law to put pressure on the government for change. That's the first thing. Secondly, we need to look at what society that we need to have. There's been lots of debates about national curriculum, more black history, colonial history, empire history, migration history. That's important. There's been lots of talk in the media about what they need to do. It's no good getting rid of Fawlty Towers. Actually, I don't mind Fawlty Towers, actually. I mean, it's actually Fawlty Towers, but it's superficial, yeah. Get rid of all Little Britain. It's a symbolic gesture. We want to think deep. As David mentioned a while ago, it's very good for local authorities to have the blue lit lamp outside their town hall and have a statement that we support Black Lives Matter. But how are they treating their black staff? That's a question we need to ask ourselves. It's not. We have to go beyond the superficial to something deep and something that's going to do a change that's required. Because now all of us carry this. All people of colour carry this burden and the traumatization of discrimination. And each time you see that video of George Floyd being killed, the way he's been killed, it touches a nerve in us as people of colour. Directly or indirectly, it touches us, and it re-traumatizes the experiences of discrimination and the experiences of being the other, and all that. And it's not like now that white people are saying, "Oh, we understand that now because we've seen on CCTV." You don't need to have a film footage. You should be accepting our own lived experiences. And now they can see it's about the change that we need to do. So I think the message for all of us in terms of the work that we're doing, stuff around the ongoing stuff around Grenfell, the Windrush scandal, which I'm still involved, fighting for justice for the Windrush generation. They've been treated appallingly by the Home Office, same Home Secretary who talks about her that she's been discriminated. But yet she's still overseeing a hostile environment which is structurally racist and are targeting people of colour. There's still big issues around the stop and search. I mean, when people talk about what's happened to George Floyd and I Can't Breathe and Trayvon Martin, the very first campaign I got involved with after leaving law school in the late 80s was the murder in Wolverhampton, my hometown, where Ian Powell was MP. That's another story in itself. Of a guy called Clinton McKerbin, who was killed in the next clothes shop by 3 police officers. One sat in his legs, one sat in his stomach, and one did the arm around his neck. They thought he stole a credit card. They didn't ask him first, they just jumped on him. And guess what he said, by the way, 30 years ago in Wolverhampton? I can't breathe.
Oh, God.
So we've had our own I can't breathe moments in our own experiences in Britain. But unfortunately, we have to wait for permission from America to do something. And this is, so we've got to take our own agency in all of this at the same time. I'll stop there.
No, that is fantastic, very powerful contribution, Patrick. And I remember the Stephen Lawrence moment very acutely. I was actually a press officer at the Home Office at the time, working for Paul Boateng at the time, who was the first ever Black Minister of State. He was the police minister, and I was there when the Macpherson report came out, when the phrase was coined, institutional racism, and we all felt it was a very powerful moment because finally it had a name. You know, we had articulated, and it felt like, wow, this is a big moment, and yet not that much changed afterwards. So I think you're right, and I just wanted to come back to you because I think your point is very important, and I feel it very acutely. I think there has to be sort of two limbs of making progress. I think direct action is very, very important, but changing the law is also very important. What kind of legislative change would you like to see?
I think it's beyond race equality. We need to talk about human rights, which raises a fundamental question of a written constitution. It raises fundamental questions about our democracy. It's not simply about tinkering around and adding some more public sector equality duties or whatever it is. It's actually quite fundamental. It's very fundamental how we are as a society, as a nation. And I think that's the kind of conversation we should be having. It's enshrining that race equality and other aspects connected with intersectionality is embedded in the law. Everything's too discretionary.
Yeah.
There's no, everything's, you know, we're all subjects of, and it's too discretionary.
Yeah, and it's very subjective, isn't it? It's due regard. Yes. And we all know that you can get away, you can write your way round that in terms of due regard. So look, thanks so much for all the panelists. We've got loads of questions and comments coming in, and I'm just going to start with a theme which has come up a lot from various contributors from a very good place, and people are saying, look, I'm conscious I am white, I am conscious of my privilege, help me. How can the panelists, and this is to all the panelists, how can, the question is from a white person, obviously, how can I as a white person, as you say, Patrick, be part of the solution, not be part of the problem? Someone has messaged, how do we talk to our children about this? In terms of, I think a lot of the prejudice obviously starts from school and starts from a very young age. So white people saying, how do we talk to our children about this? And a very interesting point where somebody actually said, which was, and I think, by the way, thanks very much for your honesty in these questions. So I think a lot of my white friends, for example, do say it's quite difficult to kind of just be honest about the guilt that a lot of people are feeling. Someone has said, how do we prevent ourselves as, you know, well-meaning white people from slipping into sort of patronizing white saviorism? And I think Camille will know a lot about this particularly. But Shola, could I start off with you, just some of your thoughts on this?
Okay, so first of all, I think to our white allies, because that's what you're asking to be. You're saying, how can I be a better ally? How can I be your sibling in the truest sense of the word? So I will start by saying that you have to understand that it's going to be an uncomfortable journey for you. This is something that is not something you're used to. You're going to hear some truths that will never have crossed your mind, and those truths will probably be about you and what you've been exposed to and what you've probably been oblivious to, and one way or the other kind of enabled. And when we talk about things like guilt, I think that I look at guilt in different stages. I think that some of the guilt will be because you're simply a decent human being that is hurt that something like this is happening to somebody else. I had a friend who called me like a month ago, and she called me about something else, but then she mentioned to me that her husband had passed away the previous month. I felt guilty, not because I had anything to do with his passing away. I felt guilty because I wasn't there for her, because I didn't know. And maybe I could have helped her somehow. So some of you your guilt is going to be coming from that sense as well, I suspect. But there will also be the sense that you may know at some level that perhaps you've participated in the use of certain language that has historical derogatory meaning, or you've been in the room where certain language or behavior that perpetuates racism has happened, but you've looked the other way, or you've giggled, you smiled, you've laughed it off because you don't want to be the one to bring about discomfort. That's going to be one of the things that you have to do. And when we talk about children, okay, and we know children learn from their parents, but we also know children can teach their parents. You have no idea what my kids are teaching me right now. And I think it's important that if you have black and brown friends, and if you don't, please go and make some. It's not difficult. But if you have black and brown friends that you feel comfortable with, they're the people to have a safe conversation with. And when I say the word safe, I don't mean it's not going to get uncomfortable. I mean it's going to get real uncomfortable, but you feel safe enough with them to be able to air out your cobwebs, because they're not going to pass judgment on you. Ayesha won't pass judgment on her white friends because she knows the person
Well, I do sometimes, to be fair.
but when
Only kidding, only kidding.
when I say pass judgment, I mean in the sense that you're not going to walk out of that room feeling like your friendship is over. You feel safe enough to be able to say things to them, and they will say things to you that will enable you to grow. So that's why I say safe, right? Those are the kind of things you need to do. And you need to be less oblivious. You need to be present. People, this level of consciousness means that you have to switch on something in your brain you never switched on before. You have to notice things that you've not noticed before. You have to question things you've not questioned before. I mean, how many of you have, for instance, noticed that your black or brown work colleague has not been promoted for the first or second time? Why didn't you raise a question on it? Especially when you know they work very hard. How many of you are on a high street or in the store and you see a certain behavior? There's something in the body language or in the words, and you just act like, well, it's not my business. It has nothing to do with me. I'm sorry, that's exactly when you should put that God-given mouth of yours to use. Yes, but I'm not saying to put yourself in terrible harm's way, but sometimes, just sometimes, because of the color of your skin, which gives you white privilege, it means that sometimes you're in a position to say something that people will pay a whole lot more attention to than the other person standing next to you who is a different color. Because white privilege is simply the advantage you have purely because of the color of your skin. It has nothing to do with your socioeconomic background, wealth, or class. I always give this example about I could walk into a store with another white woman right there in that moment. Actually, the person watching us, the security person, can't see anything different from us except the color of our skin. But 99% of the time, I would probably be the one that will be followed or treated suspiciously, even though I may have more money in my bank account. But it's not written on either of our foreheads how much we have, where we go to, you know who we are. And the other thing about this again is always bear in mind context and situations. So Amy Cooper as a very good example. I could be having a discussion with an Amy Cooper. We could even be having a slight disagreement. Now, see the way I talk. I'm somebody who speaks passionately, right? I could never speak quietly. I don't think I was born that way. And I can speak authoritatively about what I know. And Amy Cooper could be speaking back at me and shrieking and upset. Someone could walk into a police officer could walk into that store or into that moment, and all they will see is an angry black woman. It would not matter in that moment that I'm a qualified lawyer or where I went to school or what degrees I have. All they'll be paying attention to is this negative stereotype about me because I'm coming across as dominant. These are their words. And because I'm coming across as dominant, apparently I'm a bully. And because apparently I'm a bully, I'm aggressive. While Amy Cooper will be there shrieking, she's threatening my life. I'm so upset. Do you see the difference? And it's in positions, it's in situations like that, that you can exercise your privilege to say, this is wrong. You don't know what's going on. Can say something rather than be quiet. So again, get ready to be uncomfortable.
Okay.
And it's good to be uncomfortable, but also get ready to use your privilege to be able to stand up or stand in the gap for your black and brown siblings.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Shola. And I think you're absolutely right. You know, people we have to have these conversations as uncomfortable as they may be. But I won't, any of my white friends watching, I won't judge you. That I'll judge you on what you're wearing. I'll judge you on other things. I won't judge you on this. David, what are some of your thoughts on this issue? What can our white allies do? Oh, I think David's on mute.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. The same as Shola, really. I think be prepared to get uncomfortable. And if the first bit of discomfort you get, and you think, oh, that's it, then you weren't being genuine in the first place. Because I think, there's a lot of people, who will just be tired of the response of what they see as liberal white people who speak in the name of diversity and then leave structural racism untouched. So, the people that are doing that, it's not about just diversity it's about diversity, it's about hitting the structure. But I mean, some practical things. I mean, I set up white organizations, set up an organization with white people and discuss the issues as white people, and take your views around racism to the system. I think sometimes what happens is that, it's not to say that we shouldn't unite, black and white should unite, but sometimes what happens is more of a conversation around how do you feel as a black person, rather than actually, this is how I feel as a white ally who wants to do something about it with other white people, set up something and go and attack the system. The other thing is be honest about it. Have conversations with your families. When you see it and you hear it, you call it out. If you feel that your partner, your husband or wife continues with their racism, leave them. Because if you're really that committed to it, those are the kind of actions that you would take. So I think it's about calling it out. When you're in spaces where we aren't, we have that privilege, the acid test, are you raising the issues there amongst those people that you share that privilege with? And if we're not in those spaces, then you have the power and the authority to bring us into those spaces. I think is there something around, you can speak to black people. That's really, really very, very, very important. But take action. You know what to do. You know that if you're committed to something and you don't like something and you want to fight against something, organize amongst yourself and do it. I respect white people that not just coming to me to tell me they've done something, that I just realize it. Or just, by the way, I just realized that my friend Tom has actually organized with other white people, gone to the organization that I represent, which is the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy. They've gone there and they're raising those issues as white people. I respect that.
Yeah. Sort of show, don't tell in terms of I think that's very important, and I do also think it is really incumbent on all of us to call it out, but particularly our white allies. And I think someone had actually put up on the screen that even as a white person sometimes feels frightened about speaking out, but I think we have to get to that critical mass, because one of the things that holds you back as a person of color, and I know I've been the only woman in the room a lot, I've been the only woman of color in the room, and suddenly you have the entire weight of a race, of a gender upon your shoulders, and you're always the person that has to speak out about everything, and take the pressure off the people of the lone people of color. I mean, ideally get a critical mass of people in the room, but take the pressure off, speak out. It can be difficult to speak out, but the more we all start speaking out, that is how change is going to come. If we all sit silently in those meetings around the board table and then rant on social media about how things are unfair, then we're never going to change the conversation. Camille, what are your thoughts on this, particularly in the charity sector, where there must be quite a lot of the sentiment, particularly the white savior thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the same is true from what David and Shola has been speaking about for the sector, because, the sector is a microcosm of bigger society, all institutions are. And something that I think you both touched on, and I think is incredibly important, is that power. Often I hear from so many white colleagues, allies that they want to give up this power. They want to give it away. I can give away my power to you, and therefore you'll that will alleviate me of this white saviorism. It's the opposite. Don't give it up. It's using your power in a way that allows you to fill that space if there isn't a person of color in that room, that you can speak up for them. So I think it's being aware of the space you're taking up and how much space you take within those, whether it's meetings or discussions, or who's at that decision table, and could someone else be in that space, but also not going straight to that space of giving up that power. It's using it in the right way. So I wanted to kind of mention that. And specifically to that kind of giving up your space, really thinking about I know lots of white colleagues at the moment, there's webinars and things going on everywhere, and people are being asked to speak on different things. And often I've been asked to speak on lots of different panels, and this one included. But sometimes it can be really forgotten that I can also speak on panels about my skills. I don't just have to speak on panels on race and diversity and inclusion. And although I'm very passionate and love it, and I'm here today, I'm a fundraiser. I'm a very good and highly skilled fundraiser. And there are lots of fundraising conventions, and I know some people are trying to change that in the sector, but really thinking about, like, you know, what are you asking from the emotional labor of Black colleagues, of Black friends, and why are you asking them to come to the table? Is it to be tokenistic, or is it really to have a seat at the decision-making table? And I think sometimes that can be very confused and conflicted. At Charity So White, we kind of use the approach of honesty, humility, and hope. So we ask that people are honest at their failures thus far. You know, that it has to start there. Shola said that, David said that. It has to start about kind of really unpicking the failures that have happened thus far. And one of those is that white saviorism. You know, we have to start at a place where we even acknowledge, so many people in the sector don't even want to acknowledge that white saviorism exists. And without that acknowledgement, how on earth can you move forward? The idea that you're still perpetuating that, you know, that colonial era where white people are needed to come and save. And I want to get one thing right on this white saviorism aspect. And that is that this isn't saying that you shouldn't help. You're in a position of power, so absolutely, if you have the means and you can, absolutely we should. What it's saying is who is centered as the hero in that story. When you're telling your story, when you're doing your marketing as part of the charity sector, for instance, I work in fundraising, right? So when you're doing your marketing as part of that, like, who are you centering in that story? Is it the fact that you have been able to help a person? Or is it the help that that person has received? And are they the agents of telling their own story in that space? And that's so important when it comes to that white saviorism. I feel sometimes it can be really misunderstood. The other thing we look at, as I mentioned, is that humility. So really kind of acknowledging, and we do it too, you know, we're all people of color as part of Charity So White, but we also acknowledge that we don't necessarily have the perfect approach to how we're trying to kind of move forward with change. We know we'll win. We definitely know we'll win, but we don't have the perfect approach, but that shouldn't stop us from taking action. Yeah. Often there's a fear of, like, you know, I won't speak up because I could say the wrong thing, or I might not say the right words. And you guys both spoke about creating those kind of safe spaces, what I also call brave spaces, depending on who you're bringing into that conversation. And I think it's so important that people just accept that, yeah, it might not be the perfect approach, but silence, as many have heard recently, is being complicit. And the last thing is obviously on that hope, that kind of really believing that we will move the needle, and really believing that this can happen. And again, that comes down to that kind of organizing, and you've both spoken to different ways that allies can do that in slightly different spaces. So we have 3 asks for the charity sector at Charity So White. We ask that they prioritize candid and honest conversations about racism. We ask that they publicly acknowledge racism within the sector and within their organizations, and they commit to tackling institutional racism within their organization and the fuller sector. We saw so many recently posting, and brands and charities, you know, charities aren't to blame. Again, I'm not trying to burn them down. I know I speak quite heavily about it, but it's because I'm so passionate about the sector that I'm in. So we saw lots of people in charities and brands kind of posting lots of performative, as some people have called them, statements on social media on Black Lives Matter. And we launched a campaign on Twitter where we were dishing out cookies to lots of organizations, the little emojis of cookies to people on social media, just to try and get that conversation started. And the reason we were doing it is because lots of those BAME, again, BAME, people of color, we use interchangeably, although recognize the challenges. But lots of those people of color were actually people who work in those organizations, were coming to us in our DMs, in our emails at Charity So White to say, my organization had put forward this statement saying they reject racism, but actually inside of my organization, I face it every single day, whether that's overt or whether that's covert, or whether that's lack of access to kind of progression and recruitment, or kind of someone commenting or asking to touch my hair. So there's a real kind of need, I think, for the charity sector to look inwards first, to speak internally to your staff, speak to your colleagues, speak to your staff members, speak to your volunteers. It took ages, and it took a tweet again from someone from Charity So White to even some people to ask if their BAME colleagues were okay. Just, are you okay? There is incredible trauma. We are triggered, we are in pain, and we are grieving. And I think even just asking, you know, again, that silence is noticeable. If you're not even asking your BAME colleagues if they're okay, if they're all right at this time, and just how long, kind of how far that can go in just making sure that we're seen, heard, felt, and recognized in that space is important.
Thank you so much. I think your words have just struck such a chord. Someone said actually Camille needs her own radio show ASAP, and I think we would all agree with that. And actually, I think you've just raised some such interesting
into existence.
But what I loved actually about one of the things that you said, and I hadn't actually considered it before, but I think it's really, really important. I have noticed that there is I don't call it a fashion, but there is a bit of a trend of really well-meaning white people who have actually been doing really good work, and they are on the side of the angels. It all gets quite intense, and they go, right, I'm leaving now, I'm going to leave, and I'm gifting this to a black person, I'm gifting this to a person of color. And that is not the solution. And the Penny, just what you've just said just really rammed that home to me. I know a lot of well-meaning people that have done that and expected like a great prize for it at the end, and it's not that.
And we gave them cookies.
Yeah, exactly. Give me a biscuit. Give me a biscuit.
I've kind of for them, if I may say, is that for them, especially those who've been doing such great work, they are then exercising their white privilege in saying, you know what, I've had enough.
Yeah.
It's privilege to be able to walk away from it. That's one.
Yeah.
It's also white privilege to be able to go, you know what, I started this, I've created this space for you, so here you go. Yeah. Damn, girl, you didn't create no space for me. That was my space in the first place. Yeah. It was never yours to give me.
Often vacating that patch does not make it in that way does not make it easier for, let's say you do have a black or Asian successor, that does not necessarily make it easier for him or her. There's a phenomenon, we've heard of the glass ceiling in terms of not being able to get through. There's a phenomenon called the glass cliff edge, where a minority gets catapulted into a position of power in precarious positions where he or she are more likely to fail, and they are given no support. They have no, they're not given the same like allowances. They're not given as many chances. But thank you. And you're
where we as Black, Asian, ethnic minorities have to be smarter people, because this has been happening for centuries. It's been happening for decades, for years, right? I'm sorry, but the truth is in our DNA. Our ancestors are telling us about it every single day. We can't keep acting like you don't know. You walk into a position and you need to over prepare. We already know we need to over prepare, right?
Oh yeah, it's
be aware of that cliffhanger. We have to be aware of having a support system, that you can't do it on your own. We so need to get smarter. Is my point.
And we also need to. This is, I think, where the kind of solidarity point comes in as well. Patrick, your thoughts on this, I think, really germane issue, and these comments. And thanks for your comments. That people are finding this very, very useful. What are your what's your advice to sort of white allies? And also, Kendra has raised, I think, a really important point, which is a lot of, I think, white allies don't understand the emotional trauma of Black and Asian people who experience racism, witness racism, are triggered by maybe an event from their youth or something like that. Have you got any thoughts on that, Patrick?
Yeah, sure. So there's actually a lot of resources out there that white allies can use. I mean, learning about Black history for starters. I mean, I did a campaign some years ago called 100 Great Black Britons, and that was in response to BBC when they launched the trying to find the greatest Britain of all time. It was one of those moments in British TV history and British society with Britain had this kind of schizophrenic moment. Oh, are we really British? So let's go back in the past. So they voted for Winston Churchill as the greatest Britain. I did a counter campaign saying there's been a Black presence in Britain going back 2,000 years, and the public voted for Mary Seacole, and that led to a number of nurses raising money for a statue that was in Ground St. Thomas Hospital. But more importantly, she was actually quoted for the first time ever in a national curriculum, along with Aloda Equiano, who basically is the great-great-grandfather of civil rights movement in Britain, who was a peer of Wilberforce, and he was demanding for the rights, fighting for abolition, but actually fighting for the rights of Black people as well. And there's lots of resources out there and there's what I've done. I do sort of consultancy work around equalities, and I do work with senior teams of white leaders. So I've given books for them as a gift from me, not cookies. Which one the cookies one? It might be dumpling, might be bun and cheese. So bun and cheese. Okay, well, yeah. Let's go have a bun and cheese moment. Anyway, no.
None of that cheese business.
So I've given copies of a book. Some of you may have come across this, White Fragility, by Robin J. DiAngelo. She's a white American academic. This book came out a few years ago, and the book is quite powerful because the book is written by a white person for white people to talk about their privilege. Yeah, and I think it's quite important. And in the opening chapter of this book, when you have a conversation with a white person about race, there's palpitations, cold sweat. People walk backwards, forward, sideways. I don't know, hide in baskets, hide where, But what she's trying to say is the first step of a white ally is to listen to people's experience of discrimination, and don't just knock it down or pull it down or just ignore it, basically. So this is quite important because that is the start of the journey. If you really want to be a true ally, to listen and start looking at your own privilege. And I recommend any person to get that book, White Privilege. I mean, there's other books on anti-racism and other stuff that you can do that, but that'll be a good starting point. I was interviewed a few days ago by Hackney Citizen, which is a local newspaper in Hackney. It's normally they have a print version, but because of the coronavirus, they're not able to do that. But they have a very good website, Hackney Citizen. And a journalist, white journalist, interviewed me and said to me, Patrick, what resources are out there for white allies to understand the Black cause? So in this article, there are lots of books, videos, Black causes, and a whole range of information which I think it'd be useful for white allies to look at and to start to digest as well. And I think the other thing also is one of the key issues for particularly people of colour in this country is about the whole stuff around trauma, and it gets even worse when you get bullied, harassed at work, you get stopped on the street. Everyday racism is actually a real issue, and we need to have a campaign to make sure that racism is acknowledged and recognised. I'm not saying as a medical diagnosis per se, but it's recognised as a legitimate claim when you are experiencing trauma. I mean, the trauma issue is a massive one, and that is another coronavirus conversation to be quite honest, and the whole stuff around mental well-being and identity and all that kind of stuff. But the way that this country is designed and structured, it's done in such a way that we have to prove our humanity every single day, which a white person never ever has to do. We have to prove our existence every single day, and it's tiring. I'm sure you're tired, aren't you, David? Shola, you're tired.
You can see that, can't you?
We're all tired, and one of the reasons why we are tired, apart from maybe because we're just running around trying to do lots of stuff in our day jobs and whatever, we're tired because it saps your mental energy to demonstrate your existence every single day.
Yeah.
I'm into sci-fi. I'm a Trekkie. I'm into sci-fi. And this is
we won't hold that against you, Patrick.
No, I know. And so sci-fi is fantastic because it's almost often, if you look at any classic sci-fi movie, it's about the Black experience, but it's about aliens and other people out there, other planets and other planetary systems. But often it's rooted in the experiences of discrimination of Black people in Britain, about being changing your identity, being forced into slavery, changing who you are, your persona to fit in, etc. And that has been our history, and that plus other communities as well. And so we have to have a situation where can we change all of this? And I think that's quite important. And we have to have what is the vision of Britain in as we move forward? Yeah, we've got 4 years of this government, but can we collectively create a vision to convince people that there's a better Britain out there waiting for us?
And I think you know, you end on a very important moment. I mean, one of the things that I think we've all been grappling with is there is this outpouring, as you say, we're exhausted, we're tired. It is boring to have this conversation again and again on a loop. We've all spent many decades between us, you know, working on these things. But I think it's always important to have some hope for the future as well, and some kind of optimism, because we don't want to feel that we can't make any progress. I think that's psychologically very, very tough as well, to think that, you know, that you can never ever change your circumstances. And as I said at the beginning, how do we turn this profound moment into a teachable moment that does move forward? And I'm conscious of time, but I just want to go around you all very quickly, but please do be quite punchy and brief, because I'm conscious of time. Just leave us a couple of, what are some of the practical things, maybe just 3 things that we can be doing in terms of moving forward? Because we all know, I'm sure most of us on this call are not over the moon with the state of the government at the moment. We don't really, let's be honest, believe that they are committed to the spirit and the intent of moving things forward. I'm really struck by what David said that actually a lot of this change is going to come from us, from the community, from the movement, from out with politics. Politics is often the last place to sort of catch on. How do we mobilize? How do we organize? What are some of the practical things we can do to try and make change? So I wonder if, David, if I could actually start with you, but I can say just if we could be reasonably brief on this, kind of your 3 things.
I think the first one is, like you just said, go back into communities. I think what this whole moment has done is really wake up, you know, the whole reality of the situation for Black and white people. And it's also given hope, I think. I think when you look at the screens and you see so many people talking about this, I think we can capture some of that hope in going back to our communities and mobilizing and speaking and taking community-based action. I think the second thing is about engaging people in the democratic system and encouraging people to recognize the power of their vote. I think that's really, really important. I think when politicians realize that actually you're not just shouting, you will exercise your vote, your democratic right to vote, or you will act politically. I think that begins to make a difference. I think the last thing is to white allies. I mean, we've spoken about white allies and some of the various aspects of that. I think that provides hope, but I think it's got to be on the basis of nothing about us without us. So, you know, white organizations, do what you have to do, but I think there is something about the lead has to come from our communities. So nothing about us without us. But I actually think that, you know, I mean, for me, I have to have hope. When I look back and I think about my ancestors and what they've gone through, and, you know, you had people born enslaved, and the generations they knew were enslaved. As far as they were concerned, that was the situation. They had hope. How dare I not have hope and not mobilize with people in our communities, Black and white, recognizing that this is a moment, we have to do it. And I think if we have that attitude, we will do it. The business of life is to make the generation that comes after you come into a place better than you found it. And I think that's what we're here to do. And that's why these conversations are so important. But we've got to mobilize through action.
Yeah, that was really wonderful, David. Thank you. Camille.
Thank you. I'll try and keep it to 3. So I think one of the things that's been playing on my mind is just how historically we've seen kind of pandemics really be the catalyst, sometimes of change, and leaving behind things in the past and really ripping up the rule book and imagining a new world. And I think it's really time, again, speaking specifically to the sector, for us to acknowledge that this is the place for us to make this difference. If we're not the most well placed to tackle injustice, where there's gaps from the government, what else are we set here to do? So I think there's something really powerful in just remembering and kind of leading to that hope that you spoke about, David, and really remembering that this is a time where we can start to suggest things and look at things differently. I think to my kind of community, people of color, we must stay energized and keep that momentum up. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And I know that's easier said than done, but organizing ourselves and mobilizing ourselves within our communities with groups is the most powerful way that we can do that. Having an organized strategy and way that we're going to tackle this that remains and keeps us focused with our white allies is the only way that we're going to kind of see change and make change. And I think lastly, it's kind of around that centering lived experience and trusting us. I think even that's something for Black communities to kind of really grapple with, that we must trust that we know what's best. You know, our organizations, our communities, our organizations, we're living it. So believing in that lived experience and really centering it. Therefore, we're able to kind of hold ourselves, but also at the moment, obviously the government to account. So I think that's really kind of how we keep that momentum going and really kind of drive forward and look to that hope. And lastly, kind of, I know I mentioned this already, but honestly, honesty, humility, and hope. It's how we're going to make it. It's how we're going to get there. And we need to do that together.
Brilliant.
So think, yeah.
Thank you so much, Camille. Brilliant stuff. And Patrick.
So I did a lot of stuff trying. I'm a total optimist, so you know, so I'll try and do things in a positive way. So I've launched a schools competition called 100 Great Black Britain Schools Competition, which is on my website, 100greatblackbritons.co.uk. And it's a competition to encourage young people to learn about Black British history, black and white, to learn about Black history. I think history, education, change curriculum is really, really critical. Secondly, I was involved with a number of people campaigning for National Windrush Day, which we got, and we got that because of the scandal, Windrush scandal. But to build on that National Windrush Day, I'm working with a team. We want to get the anchors of the Empire Windrush ship. The ship is at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea, off the coast of Algeria. It's been there since 1955. We want to get the anchors, bring it back to the UK as a monument. Yes, there are some monuments and statues that we don't like and we might want to get rid of, but we should have monuments and memorials to reflect our contribution, our history of the Windrush generation and the history of migration. So we just need to raise about £2 million. So if anyone's going to spare change in your pockets, all welcomed. But we want to try and get that ready in the next 3 years, because in 2023, it will be the 75th anniversary of the Empire Windrush.
Wow.
Tilbury. And that will be, I think it'll be a fantastic moment. You can touch and feel the real history. And then finally, I'm working with a colleague of mine, Dr. Angelina Osborne, and we're working on a book which is going to come out in late September called 100 Great Black Britons, celebrating 1,000 years of Black British history. And it's a resource that we have for everyone, including my allies, who can learn about Black history. And it's so that's what I'm doing.
Okay, brilliant. And I think the monument thing is a great idea. In fact, one idea that I had, which no one has seemed to, it's fallen on deaf ears with the government. If they want some new statues, I think why not have a statue, a monument in dedication of all the BAME people that worked on the front line in the health service on the COVID? Why not have a why don't we have a really big monument? That would be a monument we could all get behind. Shola, leave us, you final word, your 3 top tips for, being positive, energetic, mobilization.
All right, so I'm going to wrap it up with one thing, because my learned colleagues have spoken about hope. I'm going to talk to you about anger. Okay, people, anger can be a powerful thing to trigger you into action. Okay, listen, don't say Shola doesn't tell you anything. I need you to pay attention, because when you start waking up and you start feeling you're tired, I need you to remember what got you outraged in the first place. And when I talk about outrage, you're shocked, whether you're white, black, brown, just as a decent human being, that you want a better world for yourself and your children, you have to be able to use your anger, your outrage in a constructive way. And that for me means taking part actively as a citizen. It means not sitting aside when you see something happening with the government. If Twitter is the only thing you have to be able to communicate your displeasure, you do that. You lend your voice to campaigns and the issues that impact those around you. Active citizenship. When it's time to vote, you do not vote somebody with a moppy blonde hair who is known to be a racist, okay? Doesn't matter what kind of, charm the person has. You have to think to yourself, if you were white, you have to think to yourself, how would his flaws affect other people? Yes? Okay. And if you're black, brown, don't get comfortable in your comfort zone thinking, well, you know, I have it really good. I have a good job. Yeah, that moppy blonde hair will take that job if you do not put that person in the right place. So maintain what it is that triggers you into being an active citizen, in using your voice, using your skills, using your position, whatever it may be, to be able to engage with your MPs regularly, to be able to communicate, and also be careful with your media consumption, okay? Question, scrutinize, read more than one newspaper, watch more than one news channel, and then apply deductive reasoning to which one makes sense the most, yes? Don't say Shola doesn't tell you anything now, okay? That's why we leave it.
Well, listen, what a fantastic, energizing point on which to end this. I mean, thank you so much to all our fabulous panelists, Camille, Shola, David, Patrick. Thank you so much to the Fawcett Society for hosting this, and thank you all so much to all of you who have logged on. We've had like so many people feeding in such brilliant comments. Sorry we couldn't get through everything. So much more we could, you know, talk about. Maybe we'll do a sort of follow-up on this. Just to remind you that the hashtag, if you want to tweet about this and say how fabulous it was, is hashtag Corona Conversations. We're raising some money tonight for Southall Black Sisters, so if you want to chip in, please do that. And there's some very interesting research with the Runnymede Trust. Have a look on our website about that. And of course, if you're not a member of the Fawcett Society, we would love you to join. If you don't want to join, you can still keep abreast of all the events that we're doing. You know, the Fawcett Society is not perfect either. You know, we're trying to sort of reach out to get new members, get new perspectives. We're trying to broaden our pool as well. I mean, I feel like I've learned so much from my good friends and colleagues, and I've learned so much from you. I think we've got a great opportunity. I'm really moved by what David said, which is, it is tough right now, but how dare we not have hope, given that we stand on the shoulders of so many others that went through such hardship. And so we can all come together, but we've got a long fight. We've got 4.5 years to a general election. As Camille said, this ain't a sprint, it's a marathon. We've got to be political athletes for the next 4.5 years. We've got to get in shape. We have got to be fitter, stronger, better than the other side. We've got to really try and make some change. A lot of it isn't going to come from politics. A lot of it's going to come from us and the communities. Thank you all so much. And hopefully I will see you soon on another event with the Fawcett Society. Take care. Bye-bye.